Hello and welcome to the MMA calendar for February 2023. Before I get into talking about some of the events you should keep an eye out for this month, it is worth noting that the dates and things like that I provide are for where the event actually is. What that means is if I say that a US event takes place on a Saturday night, it'll obviously be Sunday morning for UK audiences, but it's just something to bear in mind. If you would rather find out all this information in a written format, then you can go to the link in the description to find the article version. It's a bit easier to reference if you need to check up on it than having to watch through this video again. Without further ado, here are the MMA events you should keep an eye out for, or maybe add a couple to your own calendar. Kicking the MMA action off for the month of February is the PFL Challenger Series on Friday, February 3rd. That is week 2, which features the women's featherweights. These Challenger Series are super short. You get to see someone get a PFL contract at the end of it. So it's very efficient. This card in particular, there's a fun matchup on there between Karolina Sobek and Van der Veerdonk. Michelle Montague is the one that we're really keeping an eye on over at VMTV. We've done an interview with her you can check out on this channel. She trains out of ATT with Kayla Harrison, is a former IMAF world champion. She moved to ATT after being at City Kickboxing, so plenty of experience there, and we're excited to see whether she picks up the contract on Friday, February 3rd. The first Saturday of February brings us Bellator 290 on CBS. That's a big deal for the company. It's the first time MMA has been featured on CBS in quite some time. And with that in mind, some of the promotion's top fighters are competing on this card. The likes of Darian Colwell, Henry Corrales, Lorenz Larkin, Neiman Gracie are all on the prelims. The night is capped off by 2 World Championship matchups. Middleweight champion Johnny Eblen is back in action to defend his title, and the main event is Ryan Bader versus Fedor Emelianenko 2. Heavyweight title on the line in what seems to be the final chapter in the career of the last emperor, so it might be worth tuning into just for that alone. The first UFC event of February is also Saturday the 4th. That is the UFC Fight Night between Derek Lewis and Sergey Spivak. This event should kind of be looked at like an Ultimate Fighter finale, where you get a couple of good fights and then the Ultimate Fighter stuff, because this is the card featuring the finals for the Road to UFC series. So it features a lot of Asian talent that people won't be too familiar with, but you can, check out this card and there should be some highlights and you can follow those guys and maybe go back to watch the Road to UFC series. It's on UFC Fight Pass if you do want to check that out. The Korean Superboy Doo-Ho Choi is back in action against Kyle Nelson. That's a fun one. And of course the main event, Derek Lewis looking to snap his 2-fight losing streak when he faces the rising Sergey Spivak, who would jump pretty high up with a win here. On Sunday, February 4th, LFL 7, that is Levels Fight League. They were one of our nominees for European Promotion of the Year. They made some big steps in 2022. Of course, this is only their 7th numbered event, so we're excited to see what they can do this year, and they kick off their year with a lightweight championship matchup between Akone Winless and Harold Cohen. Friday, February 10th, LFA 152. I am always keen to point out these LFA cards because you just have to look at how much of the UFC roster these days is made up of former LFA fighters. So it's always worth tuning into if you've got the time. Obviously, it's a bit difficult for people in the UK with the US time difference, but it's on UFC Fight Pass. You can check up on it at any point. On this occasion, middleweights are in the main event. Brazil's Renato Valente facing Russia's Azamat Bekhoev. On the same night, double action for the Friday, February 10th, you've got the PFL Challenger Series Week 3, of course. Another 4 fights from the Universal Studios in Orlando coming at you. It's all about the heavyweights on this occasion, 2 Brazilians in the main event. And after facing each other last year, Scotland's Louis Sutherland and Britt Abraham Babley are both on this card against different opponents. Babley picked up the win when they met, but as 2 UK heavyweights in the PFL, those are the 2 guys we're going to have our eyes on, and you can check out interviews with them on this very channel. The first UFC pay-per-view of February is UFC 284, Volkanovski versus Makhachev in Perth, Australia. I mean, the 2 title fights on this card alone are worth tuning in for. Alexander Volkanovski daring to be great when attempting to become a double champion by dethroning the lightweight champ Islam Makhachev, whilst Yair Rodriguez and Josh Emmett compete for the interim title in the featherweight division as Volkanovski moves up to try and become a double champ. With the card taking place down under, there's a ton of talent from that part of the world also. Jack Della Maddalena is going to be the name that jumps off the page for a lot of people. You've got Tyson Pedro facing Modestas Bukauskas, who's been recalled up to the UFC, which you love to see. So yeah, it's going to be a fun card in Perth, but it's all about those title fights. And there's a couple other good matchups on there. But yeah, excited to get that one underway. Octagon 39 takes place on the same night. Octagon, another one of VMTV's nominations for European MMA Promotion of the Year. They had a really great year in 2022, and it's looking like this year is going to be way bigger from the stuff they've already announced so far. One thing I will say about Octagon, if you've never checked them out, their events are incredibly entertaining. This one is live from Munich, Germany. They know how to put on a huge show. And if you're going to be watching the UFC in Perth, then this is a nice little pre-show you can watch, and then the UFC right after. Friday, February 17th, again worth pointing out, an LFA card on UFC Fight Pass. Takes place at the Horseshoe Casino in Hammond, Indiana, which is located in Chicago. The main event will feature a featherweight showdown between hometown hero Shepe Mariscal, I might have said that terribly wrong, and Brazilian dynamo Guilherme Faria. Tough names. Elsewhere on UFC Fight Pass, there's also a card from Ares FC and Fury FC taking place over that weekend. So plenty to get your teeth stuck into over there. You've also got the PFL Challenger Series Week 4. That is in the lightweight division this time round. There's a face-off between 2 finishers in the main event with Elvin Espinoza and Damir Fahabbegovic. In the co-main event, undefeated Mandel Souza, who's finished all 9 of his professional wins, will face fellow Brazilian Paulo Henrique, who steps into the PFL Smart Cage as the first deaf fighter to ever compete under the PFL banner. Unfortunately, one of the problems with recording these videos and trying to get them out at the start of the month means things are going to change and reshuffle, and that is what we've got on our hands right here, because the main event scheduled for this event, Marlon Vera taking on Corey Sandhagen in what will be one of the fights of the year, I am sure, has been moved to March 25th. So when I talk about the upcoming fight between Tyler Santos and Aaron Blanchfield being the co-main event, it is assumed that that will be now the main event, but we have not had that confirmed yet. But there you go, little update. Saturday, February 18th, we're back inside the Octagon for UFC Fight Night Vera versus Sandhagen. This Fight Night card has got some good matchups, but there's 2 that you've really got to take notice of. The first being the women's flyweight contest between Tyler Santos and Aaron Blanchfield. Huge ramifications for the division in this one. Probably the most promising flyweight contender in the UFC, taking on the woman who pushed Valentina Shevchenko further than anyone else and needs to get that rematch back. Friday, February 24th, we've got One Fight Night 7 on Prime Video. It is worth pointing out that One are delivering fights every single Friday on One Friday Fights. This is their series from the Lumpini Stadium in Thailand, mostly Muay Thai events. We haven't covered them on here because the cards get announced quite late and things like that, but for sure, keep an eye on One every single weekend at the moment. But their big card in February is One Fight Night 7, their second big event of the year, headlined by the rematch between the 2 devastating Brazilian finishers, Fabricio Wonderboy Andrade and John Hands of Stone Lineker. You are guaranteed to see a great fight between these 2. Just go back and watch the first one. And finally, the bantamweight division will have a world champion. Featherweight Muay Thai champ Tawanchai is back as well after an incredible 2022. Former double champion Martin Nguyen, fan favourite, he's on this card. Submission grappling star Danielle Kelly also. You can catch the event live on YouTube or on Prime Video if you are in the US. The PFL Challenger Series, once again, Week 5. Some really good matchups for the women's flyweight division this time around. In the main event, former WMC and WBC Muay Thai champion Chelsea Hackett looks to continue her transition into mixed martial arts when she takes on Desiree Yanez. The card also features the likes of former UFC and Invicta fighter Shayna Young and Helen Peralta, who appeared on the previous season of The Ultimate Fighter. So potentially some faces that you might recognise competing on Week 5. The final weekend of February brings 3 MMA events from 3 of the biggest promotions in the world. We will, of course, start by talking about the UFC. That is the fight night featuring Nikita Krylov versus Ryan Spann. Whilst the light heavyweight main event may have received kind of a lukewarm reaction from fans, that's putting it politely, there are some good fights on this card. One that jumps out to me, 2 guys I've been really impressed with from watching the Contender Series, that is Mike Malott versus Johan Lenesi. That's a really fun matchup, but if we're being honest, I'd be wasting your time in talking about anything other than the co-main. That is the return of Tatiana Suarez, who is undoubtedly going to be the biggest talking point of this card when she steps inside the octagon for the first time since 2019. She faces Montana De La Rosa in a bid to resume her status as a future champion in many people's eyes, including my own. Bellator is back on the same weekend with Bellator 291, Amosov versus Storley. This is, of course, the Dublin card. Bellator's routine trips to Dublin are always going to be a big night for European MMA fans. It's fair to say this one has caused a lot of conversation. It does feel a little bit underwhelming compared to some of the other events that they've had in this slot. Of course, the crowd will make it a night to remember, specifically when there's an Irish fighter competing, the likes of which include Peter Queally, Sinead Kavanagh, Kieran Clark, Carl and Brian Moore, Richie Smullen and Charlie Ward. The welterweight title fight between Amosov and Storley is a really good matchup, but it's hard to imagine the crowd being all that invested by the time the card gets to this point. It was really crying out for James Gallagher and Brett Johns, which we didn't get. So it'll be interesting to see how this one goes down. I'm sure the atmosphere will be incredible regardless. And finally, the last event we're going to be talking about, that is KSW 79, which is shaping up to be a big card, literally. The heavyweights are centre stage for this event. Just look at KSW's promotion for it. That's what they're focusing in on for this card in the Czech Republic. Champion Phil de Vries is in the main event, looking to continue his dominant reign as champion when he tries to get revenge over a man who beat him inside the UFC octagon back in 2012. Feels like a long time ago now, doesn't it? Having fought just 3 times since his victory over Phil de Vries, Todd Duffy is back after last fighting in 2019 to try and dethrone the champion by beating him for a second time. I bet you didn't have Todd Duffy returning against Phil de Vries on your MMA bingo card for 2023. That rounds out the MMA preview for February before March kicks off in a massive way with the return of John Jones in the UFC. Is there an event that you've got your eye on that maybe we didn't cover, maybe we missed something off? Please let us know. We'll make sure we add it to the calendar for future editions. And finally, enjoy the fights.